So we'll get started in just a few minutes here, just waiting for stragglers to come in.
Okay.
All right, it's about 4:33. I think we can probably get going. I'll blather on for a little bit.
Okay.
My stuff is the least important. So as people continue to enter the room, I will just blather for a little bit. So
Okay.
welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our event with Whitney Otto. I almost said Whitney Houston. I don't know why it almost came out like that. That would be weird. On behalf of my two colleagues, one of whom you'll see later, Kim Bissell, and one who is working deftly and stealthily behind the scenes to keep the technology plates spinning, Eloise Doubleday, we would like to thank you for your support and for joining us this evening. We are so excited about this event with Whitney, but before we get started, just a few announcements. We are hosting one other virtual event in May. On Monday, May 24th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, we are hosting Alex McElroy with their debut novel, The Atmospherians. Alex used to live in Oregon and now lives in Brooklyn. Alex will be joined in conversation that evening by Portland authors Chelsea Beaker, Genevieve Hudson, and Kimberly King Parson. This event is free, but does require pre-registration. Kim will be posting a link in the chat box to this event, so you can register for that. We have 3 events in June we're very excited about, involving several authors: Brian Benson, Richard Brown, Julie Clark, Amy Mason Doan, Ellen Michelson, Joanna Rose, and Susie Vitello. You will find a link to the June event schedule in the chat box as well. If you have questions for Whitney this evening, please post them in the Q&A box, which is on the bottom right-hand side of the Zoom box. In the chat box, you will also find a link to the event page for Whitney, where you can purchase copies of her new book, her previous books, as well as books about some of the artists she will be discussing this evening. It is by no means a complete list, but it's a start. And speaking of starting, let's get started. Whitney Otto is the author of 5 novels, the first of which, How to Make an American Quilt, was made into a movie by the same name. She was raised in California, but has lived in Portland with her family for quite some time. In fact, I frequently see Whitney out walking in the neighborhood, and I am always happy when we bump into each other. Her most recent novel, 8 Girls Taking Pictures, functions as a sort of companion piece to her new book, Art for the Ladylike, although they each stand fully on their own, but both focus on women who have influenced Whitney and draw from some of the same source material. Whitney's newest book, Art for the Ladylike, doubles as an autobiography, as Whitney threads her own life through the stories of these women. The book explores what it means to be a woman in a creative field. The pieces in Art for the Ladylike don't function as full-blown biographies of these 8 pioneering women photographers. Rather, they are pieces of their lives, like a quilt, which is a theme in Whitney's work, writing in literary collages. Lydia Yuknovich has described this book as a work of breathtaking texture, a love letter to the resilience and beauty of women who deign to make art. Please join me in welcoming Whitney Otto.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Ellie. I'm horrible at technology, so if I screw this up, this is why. But I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. If you're in Portland, I know it's beautiful out right now, and you probably don't want to be inside. Anyways, I don't have a lot of more intro to this book since Sally did such a great job. It is my autobiography in that I think we can be known by what we love, and I think we are what we love. And and the 8 women photographers that sort of form the spine of this autobiography are photographers who I've loved since my youth, which now was a long time ago. So it's not that I set out to write about female photographers. This is a much more personal selection. I mean, they mean something to me. It's not that I'm just writing about photography. And as Sally pointed out, it is just pieces of their lives. And so I'm going to do the slideshow, and the slideshow barely covers them. I mean, if you find anything interesting here, I really encourage you to look into their lives, you know, in a much more full fashion, and also to look at more of their work, because you're going to see a very small slice of it here. So this is sort of like a light introduction to them. I did write a novel, 8 Girls Taking Pictures, which is the fictional version sort of this, as Sally pointed out. I knew when I was writing, I started this book actually in the early aughts, and it was kind of largely finished then, and then I went to the novel. But I wanted to do a fictional and a non-fictional treatment using the same source material. So that's kind of where this comes from. But as Sally said too, they stand alone completely, and they're done in a completely different way. I wanted to write about what it means to balance love and work. For women, I think there's a lot of that goes on in our lives. And also to sort of show how art enters our lives in an everyday, casual fashion. You don't have to have a degree in art history to go into a museum or to look at photographs or sculpture or anything else. You can always start with sort of what sort of speaks to you and look into more of it if you want, but really, I would hope in some sense, this book is sort of a demystification of having interaction with art. Certainly, I'm no expert. And this book does draw on my life, bits of biography. These are not full biographies of these women. A little bit of art history, a little bit of feminism. There's some films that are mentioned, other books are mentioned, paintings. So as I said, the spine is sort of the photographers, but there's a lot of other digression because anyone who knows me knows that I'm incredibly digressive. Anyway, so that's sort of the intro to everything. So I'm going to hopefully make this work right. So I like starting out with this quote, which shows up a few times in my book. They tell you the important pictures are taken on the battlefield, then ban you from the battlefield. And I think that this sort of typifies what happens to, or a lot of women in art. And a lot of these women that I write about were born in the late 19th century, and they come right up through the 21st century. So they kind of span the 20th century, really. And I should say with photography too, women were part of photography from the beginning. So they didn't kind of have to break into it, but once they were in, that's sort of where the work starts with, you know, being taken seriously or getting better commissions or whatever it is, or, you know, however you're going to, you know, run your career. And most photographers, at least these photographers, do many different things. They do art photography, they do journalism, they do portraits, they do advertising. I think photographers, like writers, often have to diversify to sort of cobble it all together. Okay, so this is Sally Mann. And Sally Mann was born in Virginia in 1950. She's one of our greatest living photographers now. She's really very interesting, and she works a lot with film, but also with glass plates. She does large format cameras, as you can see here. She does landscapes. She was recording her husband's illness. He had MS. When her dogs would die, she photographed their bones. She also photographed a place called the Body Farm, which is some acreage where literally they would dump bodies for forensic students to study, to see what happens in decay and to judge how much time it takes for decay. So some of her stuff is kind of dark, but what she's known for primarily is Immediate Family, which are a series of photographs of her 3 children. And they're beautiful. I mean, they're elegant, they're beautiful, but they also upset a lot of people. They were not without controversy. I'm going to show you one of the pictures, and it wasn't always because they were nude. That wasn't it. A lot of it was, there'd be a picture of a child on a urine-stained mattress, or bee stung, or kids playing like they're adults. There's a lot of really interesting aspects to these kids. And the thing that drew me to them, to the series, and which came out in 1991 or so, is that I had a baby at the time, and I couldn't find anything that spoke to me in terms of motherhood and being a creative woman with a child. And when I saw Immediate Family, immediately it spoke to me, because it wasn't sentimental, and it was realistic, and it was, as I said, it was beautiful. I know I keep saying it was beautiful, but it was. And there were just so many things in there that meant something to me. So that's where Sally Mann comes in. And this is one of her pictures. This is taken in 1984, and it's called New Mothers. And you can see her 2 daughters are acting like adults, and one's got a fake cigarette, and the other one's got her hand on her hip. And this picture is not like the most controversial. There's a couple in there that are, but they're not here. Okay, so this is Ruth Orkin. Ruth Orkin was born in Boston in 1921. This is her centennial. I would encourage you to look up some Ruth Orkin information if this appeals to you. Everybody knows Ruth Orkin's work. They don't always know her name. Many people do. I mean, she is an incredibly well-known photographer. She is in no way obscure. And I love this picture because when she was 17, she decided to take her little bike and ride from Los Angeles to New York in 1939 by herself. And this just fascinated me that she would do this. Her mother was in the entertainment industry. She'd been a silent film actress. Her father did different things, but he made these toys that are highly collectible today. And she started taking pictures when she was very, very young. This is one of her portraits. As I said, like a lot of photographers, she did a lot of different things. She, I think, worked on a ship. She, was a ship's photographer. She worked in a nightclub. She was a freelancer. She did all kinds of things. And she took a lot of portraits of a lot of very famous people. I mean, like, Carson McCullers and Leonard Bernstein, and of course, Einstein. I mean, the list goes on. So she married a man named Morris Engel, and together they made this movie called Little Fugitive, which is a great film, little independent film. And Francois Truffaut said that this film kicked off French New Wave. So it's an important film too. Hold on a second. Sorry. So it's a very important film, and it's a wonderful film, and it got nominated for an Oscar. And then they did a second film called Lovers and Lollipops, where I think she helped with the screenplay, but she didn't work on the film the same way she did with this one. And then there's a third one called Weddings and Babies. And my favorite of the 3 is Lovers and Lollipops. I think it's terrific. But one of the reasons why she wasn't working on the other 2 in the same way she did with this one is because they had 2 children and she was home with the kids. She was almost 40, I think, when she had the first one. So this is why everybody knows Ruth Orkin. I mean, there's a million images you could see of hers that you would recognize too, but this is sort of a ground zero image. And this is American Girl in Italy, 1951. And Ruth was traveling through Italy, coming back, I want to say from Israel maybe, and she met this woman who called herself Jinx Allen, whose name is Ladylike Craig. And they decided to do a series of photographs together called Don't Be Afraid to Travel Alone. And when I first saw this picture in my teens, it was everything to me. It was aspirational in every possible way. I thought, this is the life I want. I want to walk down the street in Florence, and I just want to be that unencumbered. And I just loved it so much. I didn't know until my 40s that it was kind of a controversial picture too. Some women looked at it and felt that the model seems like she's afraid as she passes through all these men that are looking at her. But Ladylike Craig has said she wasn't, that she was having a wonderful time. And that's how it always struck me. And I love this picture. But then I got older and had a baby myself. And this is Ruth hanging out the window of their apartment in New York, which is overlooking Central Park. So when she was home with the kids, she photographed her own children, but she also began to photograph the park and the skyline. And she photographed the park just all times of day, evening, through seasons, through weather. The park would be crowded with people, it would be empty, but it was almost like a constant running movie of the park. And it was published in a book called The World Through My Window. And it was published in 1978. And then she did more pictures from my window in 1983. And I saw this series when I was in New York. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh my God, I get this. I get this being home. And you can see how a creative woman like Sally Mann, who's photographing her children, like Ruth Orkin, who's photographing the world outside her window, that you can see that the need to make art, the need to express, it doesn't go away. You begin to sort of, do what you can. And one of the quotes from her about this was, well, she said, I want to thank the children for helping me shoot. They helped me by keeping me home so much. And she also said, now that I think about it, I don't see anyone but a housewife could have got all this done. I'm just going to show you just a couple of these pictures of the skyline in the park. I hope I didn't go too fast. I can't hear you, so I'll never know. Okay, so this is Imogen Cunningham. And Imogen Cunningham was born in Portland, Oregon, but she was raised in Seattle. She was the 10th child of two parents who had children before her. She was the only child that they had together. And her father was very progressive. He, wanted them to live in a commune. He believed in animal rights. He built her a dark room, even though he said that he didn't know why she wanted to be a dirty photographer. And this was kind of amazing considering she was born in 1883. She also ended up being the only one in her family who graduated from college. She went to the University of Washington and she got a degree in chemistry. At that time, you couldn't major in photography. So a lot of times you would major in the sciences. And I want to say something about the fathers right here is that all these photographers have really interesting relationships with their fathers. I mean, some are a little less healthy than others, but none of these men wanted their daughters to be sons. That wasn't how they raised them. And many of them were very progressive about in terms of their daughters, but not about women in general. Some were more progressive about women in general, but not always. And so their fathers are very instrumental for them, which I found really interesting. And this was taken in probably the late 20s. Okay, so here she is again. And this is right outside of University of Washington, where she went to school. And she's probably about 22 here. And I just love this picture because she's so young. And it's so, I don't know, it feels so hopeful to me, even though, and this is taken in around 1905. So it's pretty new in the 20th century. Okay, this is called Glacial Lily. She took it in 1927. So when she graduated from college, she got this award kind of thing, where she got to go to Dresden, Germany for a year and study with the foremost photochemist there. She did that. She went through New York. She not only met Alfred Stieglitz, she took pictures of him. She wrote an award-winning paper on photography. Then she came back, she opened up her own studio, and she does all this by the time she's in her late 20s. Well, she gets introduced by mail to this man, Roy Partridge, who's in Italy. He's American, but he's in Italy and he's etching over there. And he falls in love with her by mail. They have this correspondence. And he says, oh, you know, come to Italy. We're going to have this like magical life. Except World War I begins. And so he comes back. They do marry. They have one child. She's pregnant with twins for their second children. While she's pregnant with the first one, she takes a bunch of pictures of him where he's like Narcissus, which of course was prescient. And she takes a lot of these male nudes. And that's why she says, I invented the male nude, because it was very, very scandalous for her to be doing this at that time. As I said, it's very early 20th century. She also, what's I going to say about her? Well, she's trying to take pictures at the same time, but when she's pregnant, her second pregnancy is very hard, and he's kind of gone a lot, so he can go do his art. And they have this housekeeper who keeps lighting their house on fire. And so if you want to know more about that, it's in my book. It's very interesting, but they do end up in California where he's teaching at Mills College and she becomes a faculty wife. But one thing that she's known for, and she too took a lot of pictures of a lot of famous people, whether it was Ruth Asawa, Martha Graham, Gertrude Stein, Stieglitz, Frida Kahlo. I mean, she's a very, very established photographer. She's great, as a matter of fact, and does a lot of different stuff. But when she was home with the kids, she took a lot of pictures, a lot of botanicals, and they were in her garden because that's where she was. So again, in the same way that Ruth Orkin is taking pictures of New York and Sally Mann is taking pictures of her children, Imogen Cunningham is taking pictures of plants because that's where they are. Now, one thing I thought was interesting too is that Edward Weston, and I should say that Imogen Cunningham was in a group, established a group with Edward Weston and with Ansel Adams and a few other photographers that they called themselves F64. And what they were committed to was natural photography, using natural light, not having everything either really manipulated or to imitate painting. When photography begins, it's sort of imitating painting, which is why, for example, she had her husband modeling as Narcissus. You know, they were going through some of the same subjects that painters would paint, right? So she becomes very modernist very fast. And I just want to tell you what Edward Weston had to say about this picture. This is in 1928. He writes to her and he says, sorry, I went out to the museum today to see the International Salon of Photography. As usual, most of it was rubbish, although several Japanese had fine things, but I had one thrill, and it was your print, Glacial Lily. It stopped me at once. I did not note the signature until I exclaimed to myself, this is fine. It's the best thing in the show, Imogen, and if you keep up to that standard, you will be one of a handful of important photographers in America or anywhere. Thank you for giving me the rare pleasure. And what she notes about that is she said, of course, I'd been photographing for 25 years. This is one of my favorite pictures of her. It's called Unmade Bed, 1957. I just happen to love it. Okay, so this is Edward Weston and Margareta Mather. He was married with 4 kids, and he had a suburban sort of photography studio in what's now Glendale, California. But Margaret Mather was his mistress for 10 years, and she was also a photographer. She's a really interesting character in her own right. I write a little bit about her in the book. She was very, very modernist. They think he was very much influenced by her, and she sometimes was a prostitute, sometimes drank. She was a lesbian, except she was involved with Weston. And this picture is one that Imogen took of them. She did a whole series of them together, and I just think it's gorgeous. And there's probably about 8 pictures that she does, 8 or 10 pictures of them. Okay, so this is Tina Modotti, and Tina Modotti was born in 1896 in a small town in Italy. Her family was large. It did not have money, and it was very political. They lived in Austria for several years, so she knew how to speak German, she spoke Italian, she spoke English. And her father ended up emigrating to San Francisco. He brought the two oldest kids with him, her sisters, who were seamstresses at I Magnin. And then she came over, and eventually he brought the whole family over, the other kids and the wife. And when she was living in San Francisco, she modeled, she was involved with Italian theater, and she was also a seamstress. She had also worked in factories in Italy when she was 12 years old. In San Francisco, she meets this guy, Robo Richer, who's from Oregon, and he's very arty. And they fall in love. They tell everyone they're married, and they take off for Los Angeles. She gets down there, and she's a silent film actor. And they always cast her in roles where she's the mistress or she's kind of whorish, you know. I mean, she's always the bad girl, and she really did not enjoy that. But they would keep these salons at their apartment, and Edward Weston came to one of them, and they immediately combust. I mean, they're all over each other, and he's saying goodbye to Margareta Mather because Robo decides he's going to move to Mexico. So he's in Mexico City. And Mexico City in the 1920s is kind of like being in Paris in the 1920s or Harlem in the 1920s or Greenwich Village. It's kind of this mix of intellectualism and art and music and politics and writing. And so they're having this flowering that's kind of going on in Mexico City. So he says, you got to get here. Well, before she can get there, he dies of smallpox. So Edward says, so she says, well, I'm going to go anyways. And Edward says, I'm going to go with you. Now his wife, and of course he's telling his wife that I'm going with my friend, Tina, says, okay, but you got to take one of the kids with you, and which I love. So they take one of the kids with them, one of his sons, he's 14, and they go live in Mexico City. And while she's there, that's where she meets Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo and all the people that are coming through there. And she becomes a member of the Communist Party. Edward Weston is not political. He doesn't really enjoy this. And of course, she's with other men. He's with other women. He doesn't enjoy that either. And he's down there with her for about a year and a half, couple of years. And they show, his pictures. And even though she's his lover and his muse, and he takes a lot of nudes of her, which end up being very scandalous later for her. So he takes all these pictures of her, and she learns how to take pictures herself. Like Margareta Mather, like Weston, she's also a modernist. So a lot of her stuff is very modernist, but also it celebrates a lot of Mexican culture and Mexican people because she is in love with everything that's Mexico. This is one of my favorite pictures of her. It's called Roses, 1928. And I just love it because the roses are sort of crushed in the frame. And I like it because there's nothing sentimental here. And you probably are seeing that that's a theme with me. Sally Mann's kids are not sentimental. The roses are not sentimental. But I think it's just really beautiful. She did a lot of hammer and sickle pictures. And this is just one. I think it's just really kind of classic, kind of great. I love how graphic it looks. And she did some that had sombreros, some that had bandoliers. She also did people. I mean, she didn't just do objects. So here's Tina. This is one of Edward Weston's pictures of her from 1924 on their terrace. And the reason why I'm showing you this one, as you will see, is because I love the way this form sort of starts to move across the 20th century. So here she is here. Now this is Diego Rivera in the chapel at Chapingo in Mexico. It's sort of considered like the Sistine Chapel of the Americas. And he had a year-long affair with her. And they say it broke up his marriage. But she was the model for Virgin Earth. And you can see in sort of the positioning of the body and how she looks, it looks very much like the picture Weston took of her that I just showed you here. I don't know if I can show you again, so you can kind of see it again. This is a picture taken by Imogen Cunningham in 1968. And this young woman, Phoenix, was a whole series that she did. And this one is called Nude on Navajo Blanket. But again, you can kind of see how the form is sort of similar to this, and to this and to this. And I love the way, as I said, there's this connection of this photographer born in the late 19th century to work she's doing in the 60s. And then it's crossing America and Mexico. And anyways, I kind of like it. This is Julio Antonio Mea. He was a Cuban radical, and he had to leave Cuba because he was accused of trying to overthrow this dictator, Machado. So he was in Mexico. He's 7 years younger than Tina. They meet, combustion. They're this like really cool, sexy sort of political couple. And anyways, they're like this huge love affair. I mean, and I should say Weston's already gone back to the States. He went back to the States once, came back with a second child, and then left again. So this is a mural by Diego Rivera. And if you look at the center, you'll see Frida Kahlo. It's called Distributing Arms. And as I think I said, they were also communists. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, there's Tina Modotti, and she's looking up lovingly at Julio Antonio Mea. But over his shoulder is this other man, Vittorio Vidali, who is also Italian. He actually was born not far from where Tina was born, in Italy. And he is a communist operative / assassin, and he's in love with Tina Modotti. It turns into a really interesting triangle, which you can read in my book, or you can Google. And, but what I will say is this mural ended her friendship with Diego Rivera. This is Lee Miller. Lee Miller was born in Poughkeepsie, and what do I have to see where my stuff is? I don't always have my dates right. Okay, in 1907. And this is a picture that Man Ray took of her when she went to Paris. And this is an example of solarization. Solarization happens when you're developing film and some light escapes and gets into the dark room. She was very beautiful, like Tina Modotti. She was a muse. She was in film. She was a professional model. And she became the lover of Man Ray, who also is an incredible photographer and who taught her how to take pictures. So she became a photographer in her own right. And this is one of her pictures as a model. And I think of her a lot sort of like Tina Modotti. There's some similarities for me with those two. And this is one of her pictures. She took it in Paris. It's called Exploding Hand. And the reason the glass door looks like that, it's a glass door of a jewelry store. And the women's diamonds just keep hitting it every time they open it. And she was, I should say too, she was a surrealist. And surrealism is something that happens after World War I. And one of the reasons why, not the only reason, but one reason why it happens is because World War I was so catastrophic and the world had not seen a war quite like that. There was a lot of machinery involved. There were poisonous gases involved. 5 million horses died in that. There were pieces of animals that would be in trees. So it was kind of a nightmarish sort of experience. And a lot of artists were involved in this war. But surrealism can either be like odd juxtapositions that look like a dream, or it can be kind of putting yourself in a dream state. So anyways, that's the really short thing of surrealism. Now here she is in Hitler's bathtub in Munich. She ends up attaching herself with an American photographer to this sort of the American army, this sort of regiment that's going through Europe and liberating Europe at the end of the war. And this picture is taken, she had just been in Dachau. She took a lot of pictures of the concentration camps, and she took them up close because there's no telephoto lens. So she was on her subjects, and they said she took a lot of pictures the men wouldn't take. And there were no women photojournalists really in that war, but she accidentally becomes one because she ends up over in Europe in the middle of a battle at San Malo. Anyway, so here she is in Hitler's bathtub, as she says, washing off the dirt of Dachau. And the apartment is so recently vacated, the phone is still alive. And this is on April 30th, 1945, when Hitler is committing suicide, like when he's committing suicide. She's there in his tub, and she and David Sherman end up spending the night there. And I should say in her archive, there are some Nazi memorabilia things. Okay, so this is called Maria in Legend, 1974, and this is taken by Judy Dater. Judy Dater was born in, I want to say 1941, and in Los Angeles. And the reason why I have this picture is a few reasons. One of the projects that Judy Dater did with her boyfriend, who became her husband, who was a photographer who was substantially older than she is, they decided to do a project where they were going to take pictures of the same women, but not tell you if a man or a woman took them. It's called Women and Other Visions. And I find this really fascinating because you kind of want to see, is there a difference? Isn't there? And if you look at the date, 1971, and they're in the Bay Area, this is in Berkeley, you can see where it's sort of the second wave of feminism is really underway. And you can kind of understand the concept behind it and where they're coming from. I won't talk more about it, but anyways, because I wrote about it, so I won't talk more about it. But I love this picture too, because I also think it's really classical of like a mother and child photograph. It's very sort of like, Julia Margaret Cameron or Gertrude Casimir, who were some of the earliest female photographers who did a lot of mother and children. Now, this is probably Judy Dater's most famous picture. And the elderly woman on the left is, again, Imogen Cunningham. And the woman on the right is Twinka Tebow. And this is Twinka, it's Imogen and Twinka, Yosemite, 1974. And I also write about this in the book, what Dater talks about, what her inspiration for this picture was. But one of the things it always feels to me, it feels like youth and age, right? Like age is coming upon youth. Youth is looking back at age. It's also very voyeuristic. She talks a lot about being influenced by Thomas Hart Benton, the painter. So I love this picture. This picture was on every wall of every place I ever lived. And I did go to my first Judy Dater show in the late 70s at a very small gallery in Orange County, of all places, but I couldn't afford to buy anything. Unfortunately, I could retire now. Okay, so this is Madame Yvonne, and I love her. I love all of them, but I love her. And this is one of her self-portraits. She does these very whimsical self-portraits, and you can see she's got this sort of, whimsical way about her. She was born in London in 1893. Now, her father and mother were very progressive, raised her and her sister in a very progressive way. And her father owned like an ink factory. So she was sort of all about color, which I will show you in a moment. And she opened up her first photography studio when she was 19 years old. And she took all these different pictures of her sister wearing all these different outfits to look like she had a lot of clients. The thing about her is she was a suffragette from the beginning, but she always said, I wasn't the kind that was going to go in and chain myself to something or let myself be in jail. She said, I was kind of, like hanging in the tree. And I became a feminist when I was in high school in the early 70s. But I was kind of like Madame Yvonne. I was kind of like, yeah, I am, but I just couldn't be as sort of radical. And so this is one of the reasons why her kind of feminism is really like right up my alley. But one of the things that she did, and this is what drew me to her, is she worked with color, and not only with color, but she worked with this one developing lab. And she would tell them, I want it really saturated. And her colors are so saturated, they look like it could be today. And there's this one series she did, Between the Wars, that I love. It's 24 photographs of women who are titled or aristocratic or wealthy, and she dresses them up like goddesses. And they're fantastic. Okay, this is another self-portrait she did toward the end of her life. This is right after her husband died. And you can see that the picture is telling a story. She's holding up a glass plate. There's chemicals at the bottom of it. There's a picture of one of her aristocrats above her. There's a gold frame around her indicating that she feels her photographs are art. So she's sort of telling you who she is. And the thing I also love about her is she always dresses like a librarian in a movie. There's nothing colorful about her personally. So this is one of the goddesses, and this is Medusa, even though Medusa wasn't a goddess. The snakes are rubber. She affixed rhinestones to them, and it's a great picture. And I'll show you another one. It's smaller because this is cropped, and you really want to kind of see the background. There it is. It's like, you can't really tell here, but it's very glittery and pink. And if you, I just don't have a bigger image of it, but I love this. But you can see the snakes are kind of coming up like this. And this is Athena. She's, who's the goddess of wisdom and war. She's got the stuffed owl. She's got a luger. She's got a Nazi helmet on. And she does this a lot. There's a lot of anachronisms with her goddesses, which I think are great. She uses a lot of props, as you'll see. This is Arethusa, and you can see along the bottom, there's a whole strip of glass fish. She put metal in the model's hair to make it look like she's underwater. There's fake flowers. And this is the Queen of the Amazons. And you can see too, even when she puts makeup on or has makeup on the women, they look very 1930s. They look like they're between the wars. She doesn't try and hide that. She actually tries to enhance it while she's sort of putting them in costume. This is called Machine Worker in Summer, 1937. And this is a photograph that I have in my house. And I love it. And I love this photograph. It's got kind of she doesn't usually use pastels, but this one's very pastel. Reminds me a little bit of something like in 18th century France. But I like too, it's got the stuffed bird is up in the corner. It's got the fake flowers. And I like that this woman is very industriously doing like a housewifey thing, but she's not actually sewing anything. It's just all this sort of tool is around her and she's completely naked. And this is what I mean about her whimsical self in terms of feminism. She's hardcore suffragette / feminist, but with a sense of humor. So this is a picture called Corset, and it's taken by Ellen Auerbach. And Ellen Auerbach and Greta Stern. Greta Stern was born in Germany in 1904, and they were partners in this photography studio. And I think this is just a great picture, but they did a lot of stuff together. They had this photography studio did a lot of advertising. And this is the point where, and this is at the height of the Weimar Republic, there's sort of, a flowering of leaving World War I behind. It's before fascism really comes in, and you have sort of the new woman. And so you have these two women in their 20s who open up a studio, and they're doing advertising photography, because up to this point, a lot of advertising imagery was not necessarily photographs, it was drawings. And they even win like some kind of a photography advertising award. It's very short-lived for them though, because of course fascism comes in. Both women are Jewish. They got to leave. And Greta Stern, who I write about in my book, I mentioned Ellen Auerbach, but I really write about Greta Stern, ends up going to England, and then she marries a man who's from Buenos Aires, and she ends up going to Buenos Aires, which is where she lives the rest of her life. Ellen Auerbach ends up in New York. And they call themselves Ringle and Pitt. Those were their nicknames. This is another picture from them. And I should say too, with their advertising studio, they primarily used women in their advertising. And this is one of their advertisements. And you don't notice right away that the hand is human. It's not a mannequin's hand. So it's got that little bit of surrealism, but what Greta Stern did a lot was collage, and there were other people doing collage at that time, but this is almost starting to veer on collage, where you have a mannequin, you have an object, you have a human hand. And this is Ringle and Pitt again. This is them just screwing around. The two of them in the center are the two of them. So the reason why I love Greta Stern so much is many, many, many years ago, decades ago now, I got introduced to a series she did called The Sueños, which is dreams in Spanish. She was living in Buenos Aires when she and her husband, who was also a photographer, Horacio Coppola, got to Buenos Aires. They had been at the Bauhaus in Germany. Their whole approach to photography was very, very current, very modern. Buenos Aires was about 25 years behind. It was still kind of kitschy, kind of not where they were exactly. Anyway, so she gets asked in 1948, there's a magazine called Idilio. It's kind of like Ladies' Home Journal. And they ask her if she will make illustrations using photographs of dreams that this sort of lower class or middle class housewife sends into this women's magazine. They have two men on staff who write under this same name of, as if they're one man, as if they're one psychiatrist. Women send in their dreams, these housewives send in their dreams, I should say, and they interpret the dreams for them. And then Greta Stern illustrates these interpretations and illustrates these dreams. And so she does this from 1948 to 1952. And for me, I think it's one of the greatest sort of documents of sort of the mental and emotional state of the mid 20th century Western housewife. You can see this one, obviously, women without a mouth, women drowning in laundry. And she did some of these, only some survive as originals now. We don't have a lot of the originals. And she sometimes did her collages by cutting out different pictures and putting them together. And sometimes she used an enlarger where she would just block out certain parts on the paper and sort of print the collage. Woman in a cage. Woman with a baby. Balancing, of course, on the chimney. Hands of a clock. Obviously, the little door with the big key going nowhere. And this is my final picture. This one looks better than the others because it is one of the originals. And this is called Electrical Appliances for the Home. And you can see the man switching her on and off. And I ended with this one because it is the jacket of my book. And it also is reproduced in my novel, 8 Girls Taking Pictures. Anyway, so that's the end of my presentation. I know that went really long. So I'm going to try and stop sharing this now. I don't know if I know how to do this, so bear with me for a second.
I think I can.
Okay, there.
There we go. Now we're here. Whitney, that was so great. How fascinating and interesting. And now I love all these photographers too. You've hooked me. That was lovely. We have had a couple of questions that were written in before your presentation even happened. So we can start there. And other folks, if you've have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A or right into the chat, either one. And I'm going to start off with, have you shared your book, either of your books, honestly, the 8 Girls Taking Pictures or your new one, with the families of, or with some of the photographers that you've been writing about? Do they know you're writing?
Well, yes. When I wrote 8 Girls Taking Pictures, which was like 8 years ago now, whatever it is, 9 years ago, I wanted to use a photograph at the beginning of each chapter. And in order to do that, I had to contact whoever was controlling the archive. And in some cases, it was family. So I was in touch with Imogen Cunningham's archive and her family. They were lovely. I was in touch with Ruth Orkin's daughter, also lovely. And let me say this, not everyone is as generous. And I don't really understand it in a way because, I mean, I love these women and I want to spread the love, right? You know, I want them, I really strongly encourage women. That's what I'm saying with this slideshow. It's the smallest introduction because they have entire lives, it's entire careers and stuff. And they're really interesting. And then there are a couple of other family members, one who I won't name. I met him years ago. I had written about his mother more than once, and he's difficult. There's Madame Yvonne left her archive to her assistant because she didn't have any children. And the assistant left it to her boyfriend, who wasn't even part of the photography community and really didn't know how to run an archive. Tina Modotti was a rights orphan, so you didn't really have to ask anyone. Greta Stern, I could use those pictures. I wasn't in touch with the family, but since no one's controlling the archive because there wasn't one, it didn't matter. So it's all different, but yes, some people are really great. And of course, and I love hearing them talk about, their mother or their aunt, I mean, it's kind of great.
What it means to them and the person I think that's what made your presentation so special, is you've shared so much of why they're important to you. I mean, obviously that's your book, but it really is very moving to hear you talk about them specifically. It's lovely. And some of the pictures, we'd all seen so many times.
Oh yeah.
We see them again, and to wrap our brains around what the history would have been at the time. This was really fascinating. Your beautiful book celebrates so many female artistic pioneers. This is from Catherine Vaz. Who are the current women artists and photographers who most intrigue you? So do you have some new people you're seeing now, out and about now, that are maybe as core shaking or as inspiring?
Well, it's funny because during this time I've discovered some photographers that are older, that were contemporaries of these photographers I wasn't aware of. So they're not new, but they're new to me. The last big show I went to was Carrie Ann Weems, which was here in Portland. And I went and saw that one twice. And there's some pictures I really liked in that. There is, oh my God, I should have written it down. There's one woman, I'm going to get her name wrong. I think it's Martina Lopez. And there's no book of hers. The thing I have is something that I got off a photography site, but she takes pictures of her ancestors and, just regular studio shots. And she places them in really odd landscapes. So it's kind of this collision of contemporary and historical. I like, Yasumasu Morimura. I mentioned him in the book. I think he's pretty interesting. Lori, and I'm not going to get her name right. And there's, God, this is so bad. There's one other woman too I can't think of. I have these books in my office. I didn't expect this question. I'm going to write to Catherine Bass, but this other woman does these photographs of kids, and she enlarges their heads just slightly. Those are really odd. I like Pierre Agile. I think that they're kind of sparkly and glittery, and so I guess. But I'll send her an email.
So Vanessa Faselka sent in the most fascinating question. It also believes you're fascinating, and this is a little bit off topic. About art and politics, but she's curious if you think there's a real modern bohemia anywhere, that it's always tied often to a communism or libertine culture, and that this is largely gone. Do you think bohemia needs utopias? What do you think about a current bohemian culture?
I don't, because I'm older now, I'm not out and about too much, but I don't know if there's a lot of things have to come together, right? You have to have places that are affordable for artists. That's really key. And they have to have space. And I think you begin to develop community out of almost like an economic reason, right? It's like economically you're drawn to a certain area. And then pretty soon, this sort of develops. And I think the thing that gets lost when we think about these different enclaves is we're talking about a handful of people, really, because they're surrounded by people who are just, working at the market, working at the car wash, or working at the bank. It's not like everyone is like, when we think of 1920s Paris, we think of the same sort of 30 people or 25 people, and we forget everyone else is working. And I don't even know if it's possible now, because it's so, I think economics really drives a lot of it in a way. And I hope that there are bohemian places. But again, sometimes we don't know that happens until it's past. So I'm sure that they exist. And I think they are possible, but I think endlessly tied to economics. I think that's a real driving thing there.
I think you're right. These both have been, this current book and like Women Taking Pictures, have been projects of love for you. Is there something, are you heading in a similar direction, or what are you working on now? Where are you going? What's happening next?
What's happening? I am working on this one novel that I started 5 summers ago, and it keeps sort of tripping me up. But I think I've got a handle on it now, so I'll see. And it is kind of revisiting the same themes. I always have the same themes. It's like art and women. It never changes. So I'm,
You love those themes, Whitney. Don't feel bad about it. We all want to read about art and women. That's it.
Art and women, yeah. Yeah.
I think that this has been so great. Oh wait, I've got it. Let's just make sure I'm not missing any questions. Yeah, we're getting lots of comments on the art and women is awesome. Okay. Whitney, this has been really, really lovely. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank all of you out there for joining us. I wish this is one of those times when we could give a round of applause for Whitney for what a wonderful, fascinating this moment has been. Again, you can find links to her new book and all the other books that Whitney's written, as well as our upcoming events or other book suggestions. You can find it all on our website, www.broadwaybooks.net. And we look forward to seeing what's next from you, Whitney. And thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
What a gift. So thanks everyone for coming. And we look forward to seeing you on the interwebs in the future and hopefully someday in the store.
I know. Okay. Bye. Thank you guys.